Syntax, there are a lot of different options to the syntax. You can use any numeric data type. So you can use decimal, you can use int, you can use small int, tiny int. You can have it cycle. So there's an option called cycle. So if you want to dole out 1,000 numbers and then start back over at 1 instead of exhausting the sequence, you can start back over at 1. Depends on how you're using the values, but you can do that. I'm not going to go through these examples. It's pretty simple. This works essentially like an identity, except that instead of letting the table populate the value for you, you actually insert the result of next value for the sequence name. So they added a feature called throw. So this lets you raise custom error messages without using sys.messages. So if you have a custom error that you want to raise today, you have to store it in sys.messages. This is another one of those things I should have mentioned during contained databases, actually. Because this is another thing, if you have a store procedure that does raise error, and then you have a custom error number, and you didn't copy that message over to sys.messages on the new system, that piece of code is going to break. It's still going to have an error, but it's going to be a different error that the message wasn't found. So that can be confusing if you're doing testing on your app and suddenly your testing tool catches a different error. That's going to cause some confusion. So you can use this in catch or outside. If you use it outside, the severity is always 16. If you use it inside, it's whatever the severity of the original error was. So what this allowed you to do is, if you want to raise a different error first, you can still basically re-raise the original error. You could also do logging and that kind of thing before you roll back. So some raise error functionality is missing. Some people use raise error with no wait to print status messages in Management Studio when they're, if you have a lot of lines being output, eventually you beat the buffer to death in Management Studio, and it won't print out messages until it receives a certain number of a certain amount of text. You could use raise error with no wait, so that doesn't work. You can't do raise error with no log. There are a couple other things that you can't do. So there's some windowing enhancements. You can thank Itzik Ben-Gan for all of these. He really appealed to the SQL Server team to add all of the statistical and analytical functions that did not get introduced in 2005. So they didn't do anything about it in 2008 or 2008 R2. All we've had is row number, rank, dense rank. There are a couple of things they provided in 2005. So they've added a whole bunch of stuff in 2012 that let you do moving average, running totals, and basically a bunch of things around framing. So framing is, give me information about the current row and the previous 5 rows. So if you want to, or 7 rows ago. So if you wanted to take you wanted to run stats on a set of data and say, well, what were the sales figures today, and compare that in the next column. I want the sales figures from a week ago on the same day. So what was, today's Wednesday, what were sales figures last Wednesday? You can do that very easily here without doing a self-join, which always ends up being this not quite linear exponential cost of performing aggregates, right?
It's kind of like doing cursors without ever doing cursors. I mean, it gives you that kind of selectivity that
right.
you get with the cursor.
So, I'm glad you said that, Kevin. I'll give you $5 later.
Cheers.
So, windowing. So we have a bunch of different ways that you can do a running total. So this is just, I'm actually working on a very lengthy and analytical blog post about this. So we have different ways that we can calculate a running total. So I created this table that had all of my speeding tickets. And there are 10,000 rows in this table, but those aren't mine, but let's just pretend this is for a specific officer or whatever.
Nicole's, right?
I'm sorry?
You're Nicole's.
Yeah. Nicole has worse speeding tickets than I do, actually. So there are different ways that you can do this. You can use a subquery where you calculate the sum of all previous rows compared to the current row. There is a self-join where you join and you do a sum against all of the rows in the join. Same kind of thing. You sum everything before and including today. You have the good old cursor method, which is a lot more code, but is usually, today at least, this is the fastest option. This is one of the places where I think cursors are the answer before SQL Server 2012. And then you have the SQL Server 2012 method, which is just sum of ticket count over order by date, range, unbounded, preceding. So the syntax is a little daunting. It's kind of like merge. I hate merge because I could never memorize that syntax. It's one of the things I use snippets for. But once you have the syntax down, it's a lot easier to write. And I'm not going to run this because one of the methods takes a really long time, but I will show you the results. And first I'll show you from the log. So you can eyeball this, right, to figure out how long each method took. So the subquery took about a minute, the join took 8 seconds, the cursor took 5 seconds, and the window took 0.4 seconds, the new windowing functionality. So there's an easier way to also do this. How would you today, if you wanted to have another column here that showed the difference between this row and this row? So you would show the actual duration here. Self-join, right, or a cursor maybe. A CTE with row number, and you would compare and join on row number equals row number minus 1. Some really convoluted ways that you would try to figure that out. Well, in 2012, you can use lag. So my duration in milliseconds is just the date diff in milliseconds between lag, which means previous row, on the date column by 1. So whatever column has a date value that's less than the current one. So the closest one to the current row by date, and then you can supply a default value if you want, and then over order by date, and compare that to the current date value. So that actually shows how many milliseconds. So this took 57 seconds, this took almost 8 seconds, this took 5 seconds, and this took less than a second. So just another demonstration of how the new windowing functionality can make your calculations when you have to deal with multiple rows a little easier. Anybody like anything so far? Anybody?
Yeah.
I think there's some pretty cool stuff here for people. So there's some other things we'll go through. I'm not going to show examples of every one of these because some of them are kind of simple. So if, this is to appease some VB people that came over, some access people that came over and want, case is too hard. This lets them do if instead. It's just syntactic sugar around case. Doesn't work any differently, except if you have complex conditionals, you have to do nested ifs. It only supports 3. It's kind of like the difference between isnull and coalesce. Isnull, you have 2 choices. Coalesce, you have n choices. With case, you can have multiple conditionals. With if, you can only have 2 choices, and then if you need more, you need to nest. Choose, which I'm baffled at the need for this. This lets you, if you have a table that has 12 columns, you could say choose column 5, and it'll you actually have to list all of the columns. So choose month 1, month 2, month 3, and then you tell it which index you want, 5, and it'll give you the value that's in column 5. This sounds like spreadsheet functionality to me, not database, but what do I know? And I don't know where that came from. I think it's an Excel function, actually. Anybody use Excel a lot? What is the purpose of choose?
If you've got a source that you want to use a different column from based on a parameter got passed in.
So you would combine this with if,
yeah,
or case or something?
Yeah, if I'm in May, I want to look at the May previous column ago, or previous year ago, and I know that's in column J, you'll let me compute that.
Okay, but here, this is row-based, so you wouldn't be able to say from the previous row.
No, from
right?
Yeah.
I don't think it would work.
To be dynamic based on I want to compare May to May or June to June.
Right.
But I don't want to have to know that I'm in May or June. I just want to know that I'm in month 1. Go get me columns January for this year and January a year ago.
Okay.
So typically, if you would use, let's say, tables specific to month 1, month 2, month 3, and you use dynamic SQL.
Except if your columns are horizontal and not vertical, then it makes it really easy to treat a spreadsheet like a table.
Yeah.
I think that would work in SQL Server if you had if they weren't on separate rows, but you had Y 2005 1, Y 2005 2,
Yeah, like-
and then Y 2006,
If
and
you're
then
reporting a financial spreadsheet that's got 5 years of data, 60 columns across.
and it's all columns.
It's all columns,
I
yeah.
don't- If anybody here is making tables like that, I don't know.
You're importing them all the time.
All right. So okay. So they added concat. This is not a group concat. This is concat on a row. So if you have first name, comma, last name, middle name, you want to combine all those together. So the way you do it today is you say plus, use the plus sign. Well, what does concat do that plus doesn't do? It lets you ignore nulls, and it lets you ignore data types. So
take care of the casting.
yeah, right. Takes care of casting. So if you have, not sure what, let's see, graduation year. So if, let's say you have a database of your alumni, and you want to say, last name, comma, first name, bracket, graduation year, and graduation year is an int. You can just say concat last name, comma in strings, comma, and it would concat those things for you. If middle name was null, it wouldn't care; it would just leave it blank. And the graduation year, even though it's an int, it'll just concat that together for you. So a little tidier. I can't remember if I came across any issues with data types. I don't think so. They also added EO month, which, aside from being a horrible name, I don't find a lot of use for. So I know we all do reporting where we do month-based reporting, right? Well, if you pull EO month, it returns a date. So if you say the EO month of February, well, this year it's February 29th at midnight. So if you're running a reporting range and you say, I want all of February up until EO month, I think this is quite misleading. People will think, well, that's the end of the month. That must be 2359, 59.999, right? No, it's midnight. So now, when you pull this, if you actually want to make it useful for reporting, you have to do further manipulation. You have to add one and then use less than, which you should do anyway, but you can do that without this. If you know February 1st, you can add a month to that March 1st and just say less than. Now you've done less work than using this. So I don't think this is going to be very useful. I think BO month would have been a little bit more useful. But people might think that that's a month to celebrate not using BO. I don't know. They're not using deodorant. Datetime constructors. So I know we have date serial and VB where you can take the year and the month and the day, and they come in separate columns or they come in as separate parameters. You can build all of these data types from those different parameters. Not sure, again, how useful this will be for any of you, but I guess some people were asking for this stuff. These ones are pretty cool. So how many times have you pulled data from a table where someone put their birth dates in a varchar column, and one of them is no good? And try to get SQL Server to tell you which one is no good. It's impossible, right? You have to do isDate, go find it, fix it, and then run your query again and hope that it works this time. So try convert lets you try to convert to the desired data type. If it doesn't work, it just returns null, which is pretty nice. Format. So this lets you format a string-based data type and lets you use culture. So this uses .NET format. Doesn't use any of the stupid SQL Server style converts like 121 and 112, 120, all that nonsense. You actually say ENGB. I want my date to be long form ENGB. No problem, it does it. I want it to be Japanese. No problem, it does it. Parse. It tries to convert to a different data type. Optionally using culture, same way. So it lets you use ENGB. So if you want to parse a date time as British English, it'll actually look for day first, month second. And it'll have similar errors as cast and convert if it can't be convertible. So if you have 31 in the second column, it's going to break. And try parse does the same thing, except when it fails, like try convert, it returns null. Format and parse both use, and try parse, they all use .NET. So the first time that you run them, you will notice a little lag. So one of those things you might want to pump a little bit before if you have an app that uses this and you don't want the first user to feel that little hit, call something that calls it once. Oops. Not that moment to do. Anybody remember what slide I was on?
Parse, try parse.
I mean what number?
think we need a windowing function.
Yeah.
So that one.
Let's sign off.
So just a few examples. So I have a date, and in U.S. English, it's 2011-11-13. So that's November 13th. And these are just some formats with anybody .NET programmers. So you're familiar with the standard formats. We've got a bunch of different ways that we can express dates, and it's much easier than anything you would ever do in SQL Server today to do this, right? Well, now you can. So we've got a couple down here. This is going to produce it as French, and this is going to produce it as Japanese. And there's that. That's that little blip, right? So if I run this again, it's super fast. So there's like a 1 to 2 second delay, and that might be that this is a dual core VM on a Mac. But so you can see it did everything I said. So
I know what that is. Isn't it the stabilizers of the ship?
Oh, maybe that's what it is.
oh yeah, maybe it's filling the vowels. All right. So I asked for year, month, and there we go. I asked for year, month, day, there we go. Year with 3 M's, that means spell out the month in 3 characters. I don't know why I did that twice. So I probably meant to do something else there, but wasn't paying attention. And then long form, so Sunday, Sunday. Now, the thing I like about this is for things like dimanche, like you would have to set your language to French and select the date name of the weekday. And you would have to do so much custom crap to get this output to look like this for your French users. Now you can do it by just passing in, and these are parameterizable. So if I wanted to pass this culture in as a parameter, that can be tied to my user, right? And so the output from the store procedure, instead of relying on .NET, instead of relying on the browser, because a user who wants to see their stuff in French might be on a cruise ship where they can't change the regional settings, right? You've got a lot of cases like that.
Well, I'm a French guy. This is not really how we spell it.
Yeah.
Well, so that's my fault, and that's my. So you would obviously.
Normally we will say dimanche, 13 novembre. So
Yeah,
13
I'm
would be
not trying to be 100% language accurate here.
okay.
I'm just saying
Yeah.
that you would just structure this differently to cater to whatever language, whatever set of languages you're using. And you do have a good point. So what you can do there is you can parameterize the culture. You can also parameterize this string. So if you know that whatever goes with that culture should be.
The day is before the month.
Yeah, so you would swap that around for that culture and you just pass in a different
The
string.
heck is the month Sunday? That's what the month is? Sunday?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sunday, no, that's okay, but
It's the format isn't right for French people. So, and that's because I just used the same format for all 3.
No,
If I was
It's the day, month, yeah.
so same thing with currency. So if I wanted to show yen and euro symbols and all of these things, I'd have to know what these characters are. I'd have to find them. I'd have to print them out and do all kinds of conditionals. I can do that now, and it formats it the right way. So, puts the euros at the end. Doesn't have decimals for yen because yen don't come in decimals. It truncates
It's
the cycle.
exactly the same format we use in report to services. In the same reporting, you can use the same symbol. The same format.
Yeah, but today you can't do that in SQL Server.
No, it's about
Yeah.
report
So-
to service.
So instead of using it in the reporting service, you do it on the programming side. In your store
It's up to you. In report to service,
Yeah. Now you can choose.
Yeah.
Today you have to do it in reporting services. Now you can choose. So now if you have a complex user membership site or something like we have.
How we do it on the
Right. My previous job, I was at an email service provider. We had all kinds of people logging in, and they were from France, and they were from England, and they wanted their stuff to look the same way all the time. Well, they weren't just using reporting services. They were also using plain web apps, and they were using, store procedures that export text files that got emailed to them. So you don't always have those layers. You don't always have the choice to do the formatting in one spot. Sometimes you have to be able to do it in all. And if I was still there, this would help me quite a bit because I could tie everything to the user account that is the destination of the report, and it's always consistent. All right, so I'm not going to go through those. That was pretty straightforward. All right, so forSeek. Today, if you want to say forSeek, you just say force seek, and it'll pick whatever index it's going to try to seek on and try to do that. Now you can actually specify the index in the columns from the index. So it's just an extra parameter to force seek. So you don't always get the index that you want when you say force seek. Well, now you can actually force that. You can also force scan if you want. There aren't too many scenarios where you'd want to do that, because usually a scan is worse, right? But consider a case where you have a lot of plan volatility. So you have plans that are getting pushed in and out of cache, store procedures that recompile all the time. Let's say you have one where you get really good performance on a certain parameter, and because of parameter sniffing on another parameter, you get terrible performance, and the plan goes all out of whack. Well, if you get okay performance all the time with a scan, you could say force scan and always get predictable performance. It's not always the best performance you're going to get, but you're never going to get phone calls that it took half an hour. So. I don't want to run out of time. I want to get through all of my slides, so if there are any examples you guys want to see, I can come back to them. Full text search. So they now have property searching for Office 2007 Plus docs. I think this is more on the SharePoint side than anything else, but you can search for author, you can search for any of the properties that you can set in a Word doc. If you've got them stored in full text search, you can search on those properties instead of searching the whole text of the document for stuff. They've also made customizable, they've made proximity customizable. So today, if you say oranges near apples, that's a very fixed definition. Now you can say it's before or it's after, and it's within a certain number of characters. So you can actually make that search a little more flexible than it is today. There's also this thing called semantic search. So think auto tagging or keywords. So it actually inspects your document and pulls out key phrases or keywords that it thinks are useful. There was a really good demo that Michael Rees put on. Are you laughing at me, Kevin?
No, I'm sorry, Mike. I was reading an email.
That's similar to FAST or FAST.
Similar to what? Sorry.
FAST, the search tool that you can now get from SharePoint.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay.
Log now takes a base argument. So instead of saying log 32 divided by log 2, you can actually just say log 32, 2. So if you really, your keystrokes are very important to you, this is a couple of keystrokes less. Oh, I did it again. I keep hitting the wrong right arrow. All right, column-based storage. So this is, you probably heard about this as Apollo. This lets you store columns in an index together on pages. So if you think about an index today, you've got an integer column, you've got a date column, you've got a name that's a varchar, then you've got another date. These things, if you create an index on those 4 columns, they store together on a row on a page. And then you store the next row on the page and has all 4 of those columns. What you don't get out of that is a lot of compression, because you have a lot of mixed data types, you have a lot of mixed data. Only the first column is really in order, everything else is kind of a mix match or a mismatch. What this does is it lets you store that first column on its own page. So if you have 2 rows, I'll show an example in a second. You have these 2 rows, you have 1 and 2 in the first column. Well, those are stored on its own page. So you have just ints on one page. And then for the next column in the index, you have just the date, time values on one set of pages. So when you're doing aggregates, so you want to find the min date, the max date, it's much more efficient because you're only looking at one set of pages instead of all the data. Think about if one of the name columns allows 500 characters, how many rows are you going to get on a page? In a traditional B-tree index, not that many. But if the int values that correspond to that row, to those rows, you can store a lot more on a much smaller set of pages, so it really enhances I/O. It's really good for star joins, it's really good for aggregates, not so good for unions or outer joins. There's several limitations in SQL Server 2012. The most important one is once you've created a column store index, the table is read-only. So that's a big drawback for a lot of people. So this is mostly for situations where you can rebuild the index nightly and your reporting for users the next day is based on the previous day. Or you're doing partition switching and you can actually do your real-time updates into a table that doesn't have this column store index. Once the day is done, you can put the column store index on that. You can switch that partition into the column store table, and then you're all set. So again, it's good for people that can report on previous day or even previous 12 hours, if you can do that once in a while, but this is not something you're going to want to do every 5 minutes all day long. So just a quick explanation, I guess, of how it works. If right now you have, let's say we have 9 rows, and just pretend that this fills up the page. It doesn't really, but in a traditional B-tree index, let's say you got 3 rows on one page, and you got these 3 rows on another page, and then these 3 rows on the third page. In a column store index, you would have all the integer values from the first column on the same page. So if you are doing min and max on this column, I want to know the smallest ID and the highest ID. That's going to be on a set of pages that's much smaller than this index, right? Because right now, you have to do 3 reads, 3-page reads to get those values, or well, 2 and whatever overhead there is, depending on the depth of the index. And on this one, you have to do 1. And you get much better compression out of this because the likelihood that values are going to be the same are much better if all the data types are the same. So here you can see I could draw red arrows or red lines through most of these long text values because dictionary compression is going to get rid of most of that data and just provide one value and a pointer. So it allows you to store a lot more index data on a lot fewer pages and make your I/O much better. So for some of these queries, they've shown examples where the performance improved 40 times on the reads. It takes about 1.5 times. So if you were to create this index, it would take about 1.5 times longer to create that index. So, but again, if you're doing this once a day for daily reporting from the previous day, that time is negligible. There's some show plan improvements. So they tell you about memory grant info. They tell you about some hardware-dependent properties that influence the choices the optimizer made, the number of CPUs that were considered, the amount of memory, the number of pages. There's a property that tells you whether the plan was retrieved from cache, which is almost always true because when you create a plan, it inserts it in cache and then pulls it out again. So I think there's only one case I know of where that's false, and I don't even remember what it is. There's some new operators. So the window functions that we talked about, there's a new window spool operator, and there's also the column store index scan. There's several new warnings. So Kevin and I were talking yesterday about cardinality estimates. So there's a new warning that'll tell you when an implicit conversion caused a cardinality estimate to be wrong. So that warning will pop up in the plan. If you had a memory spill to temp DB, if you have memory grant delays longer than so many milliseconds, or if there is an unmatched index. So if you have a filtered index and you run a query and your where clause overlapped the boundaries of the filtered index, it would tell you, there's a warning that tells you that a filtered index could have been used if your parameters lined up. And the cache plan size is now correct. In 2008 R2 it says 46 bytes or 64 bytes or something. It actually should say kilobytes. Not a big deal, but. This one is pretty huge. The new online operations. We can now do an online index rebuild with lob. So if you have lob columns in your table now and you try to do an online rebuild, you can't. Now you'll be able to in 2012. You can also add a non-nil column with a default online, so your table doesn't come offline. That's pretty powerful for people that are doing a lot of metadata changes. There's some basic underlying performance enhancements.